And so we meet somewhere else, because we're not going to Texas, I'll tell you that. And so we meet somewhere else as a family to like get together. And this year, we just kind of pick a place, usually between us all. And this year we ended up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, like kind of Lookout Mountain, Georgia, Tennessee area. And it was gorgeous, it was beautiful. If you've never been there or spent time there, I've always driven through. And it's a place that I love. My brother, he knows directions really well, like this is something he knows. And so I remember we were driving through years ago. My brother and I, he called me at one point. He said, "Hey Kevin, we should take a road trip together." I was moving from just north of Seattle, Washington. So like literally across the country from here. And I was moving back from Seattle, Washington back to here, like to Tampa, Florida. We're moving across the country. And I was just gonna put all their stuff on some big truck and be like, "You take it, it's your problem now, we'll see you later." But my brother calls me and says, "Hey Kevin, what if we did this together? What if we took a road trip together?" And I was like, "That sounds terrible. Like, why would we do that? You know they have professionals for this." And he was like, "No, me and you, we'll just get in the car and then we'll take the U-Haul, we'll drive it together. How often do you get to drive the country with your brother?" You know, that is really sweet, you know? And now my brother only knows this country, he knows his way around it, but only through certain things, okay? Only through, there's a couple things he knows really well. One is he knows how to get through the country. He knows his interstates very well, just the general north, south, east, west of interstates. He knows those very well. The other thing he knows is barbecue restaurants. And he knew how to navigate this country based on barbecue restaurants. I'm not exaggerating that, that's not a joke. Every day he had 2 barbecue restaurants, one in the afternoon and one in the evening, that we were gonna stop at. We were gonna try all this barbecue across the country. And so we're driving across, and I'm not kidding, like every day it was 2 barbecue restaurants, afternoon and evening. We were gonna eat as much as we possibly could, and we were going to see the whole country through his lens of what made it great. And so we're driving through, I remember there was one place we stopped, it was in just north of, it was in Kansas, and we stopped in a place, not Kansas City, we weren't quite there yet. We stopped, I mean, we went to Gates and all the normal places in Kansas City. But before we got there, we stopped at one place and it was called the Rib Crib. And I remember calling Marie and she said, "Where are you guys today? Where are you having lunch?" And I said, "Oh, we're at some place called the Rack Shack." And my brother was like, "Nope, it's called the Rib Crib." And I was like, "Oh, it's called the Rib Crib." And Rack Shack's a very different restaurant, if you don't know. You know, that's one you can find on Clearwater Beach, I'm sure. And so, yeah, so we didn't go there. We went to the Rib Crib. I want to be very clear about which one we went to. And then we ended up going a little bit further, and we went to, you know, all these other places, Gates and different places. And I remember we were driving into Chattanooga, years and years ago. We were driving into Chattanooga. And we were driving through, and I'd never stopped before. I didn't know Chattanooga. And so he said, you know, look up some barbecue places. And we were a little off schedule. He said, look up some barbecue places. So I looked up, like with my phone, I looked up on the map, just barbecue places, just Googled it, right? And one place came up, and it just came with a little pin. You know that little red pin that just kind of sits, right? There was this little red pin, and it said Sugar's Ribs. And I said, "Hey, there's a place called Sugar's Ribs." And my brother instantly, he was like, "Oh yeah, it's up over this hill, and it'll be on the right. There's a big bright sign that says Sugar's Ribs." And I was like, "So you've been there before?" He's like, "No, I've never been there." It's like, "How'd you know that?" He's like, "Well, I've driven through here." Like, "But you just remembered that there was a bar." He was like, "Yeah, I've seen it." He's like, "We should go there." And we did, and it was awesome. It was awesome. Now, I don't know if you had like a navigator like this. I don't know if you had a person who like guides you through things like this. They know their way around things, people that know their way to how to go places. I will say these days, I don't know how to go anywhere. Like, I don't know if you do. I don't know how to get anywhere. I just put it in my phone, and my phone tells me how to get to the place. I'm always impressed by people who don't use that feature, and they actually just know how to, like, I don't know, navigate. They know which way north is all the time. It's wild. They must have been Boy Scouts, a lot of Boy Scouts out there that knew how to do this. They can like tell by the sun, you know, what time it is probably or something. I don't know. It's wild. Those people are amazing to me because I'm not built like that. I see that big red pen, and if you were to tell me like how to get to Big Red Pen, I'd be like, I don't know. There's a lot of ways to get to Big Red Pen, right? There's like all these different maps, all these different like light blue roads and dark blue roads, and they seem like they all go to the same place. Do they all end up there? How do I get to Big Red Pen? Like, that's what I want to know. Now, this series, what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks is not about how to get there as a place. It's how to get there as a person. Like over the last week when I was with my family, it was amazing how much we'd sit around and we'd talk about our grandparents who weren't there, right? And so like we talk about my grandma Elizabeth. My grandma Elizabeth is the sweetest woman. She is now nearly 100 years old, and she said she lives on her own still. It's not good. We're not really in favor of it, to be honest. But she lives on her own, and she does her own thing, and she's the sweetest woman. And I do remember she told me last time I saw her, she said, you know, I'm almost 100 now. And I said, wow, that's amazing. And she goes, yeah, there's all these women in the church, they're turning 98, 99, 100 years old. Why? And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, I don't see why I have to be this old. I think I'm ready to go anytime now. I went to go see her during COVID, and I said, I don't want to get you sick. I don't want to get you COVID. And she was like, no, please, it's fine. It's like, seriously, I'm ready to go any day now. Now, there's a part of me that, like, when I hear that, there's a part of me that's like, I mean, that's terrible or whatever, but there's also a part of me that's like, I wish I was at peace the way she's at peace. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you ever wish, like, I mean, I hope, like, I honestly hope that at the end of my life, I'm like, I lived a good life. Like, I got nothing else that I need to prove, nothing else I need to try, like, nothing else I need to live. I mean, I'm good. Right? Like, I've seen my kids grow up the way I want them to grow up. I've seen their kids grow up in the way I want to see them grow up. I've seen great-grandkids grow up. Like, I've seen the whole thing. I've seen this beautiful picture of my family that's flourishing. I've seen how my life has been an influence in their lives and how this is beautiful. Like, isn't that amazing? Like, we talked about my Grandpa Jack. My Grandpa Jack grew up on a farm. He worked on a farm his whole life from the time he was 9 years old. And he worked on this intensely difficult place. It was in no man's land, which is what it's called, Oklahoma. A place that nobody wanted. That's why it's called no man's land. Guess who owns it? We do. And he owned this land, and he farmed this land. It's hard land to farm. And for 90 years, he farmed that land. He gave himself to this land, and he worked so hard on it. But I remember him not being a person that was frustrated, not being a person who was like always down on things, not being a person who had to complain, a person of joy. He was a person of joy all the time. And it could have been that in every truck he owned, every single truck all over that farm, there was, in that glove box, there was a cooler that had candy bars in it. And he knew that was going to be somewhere. And maybe that's what brought him joy. I don't know. He was just a man of joy, like, all the time. And I think, like, how do I get to be there? Like, how do I become that person? That even though there's a difficult life that I'm going to live and things that are going to not go my way, how do I become a person of joy no matter what? Right? Like, have you ever had a person, like, where you know them and you're like, how do you get to be you? Have you ever met that person? I hope you have. Maybe you are that person. But I always wonder, like, how do I become the person you are? This person of peace, this person of joy. Right? My other grandfather, Gerald, I remember, like, he retired fairly young when we were growing up. He worked a difficult job in a train yard, and he retired as soon as he could. And he took the retirement. But every time he'd come home or come to his house, he would just have puzzles everywhere, just puzzles. And he would just walk in, and you just start doing a puzzle with him. Like, that's just what he did. He was always available. Like, he was just always there. And if you wanted to do anything, he'd be there to do it. Like, he was just there. He was always around. And he was just a man that loved you. You just knew that as soon as you walked in, he loved you. You didn't have to prove anything to him. You didn't have to do anything. I remember how many times he would just sit there and be like, Kevin, you're so smart. And I'd be like, I am not. Like, I know better, but you believed him, Sometimes you'd be like, maybe I am smart. I did do this 200-piece puzzle of Mickey Mouse with almost no help, almost. I might be very smart, And he would look at you and he'd have this thing, and he'd be like, you just felt loved, like, unconditionally. How do you become this person of peace, of joy, of love? Like, how do you do that? And maybe you've never thought that, but, like, seriously, if you just took a second, and I know this is a cheesy exercise, but if I were to ask you, like, just seriously, close your eyes for just a second. And I want you to picture yourself at, like, 80 years old. For somebody that's not far, maybe you're there, that's fine. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying, picture yourself like 80, 90 years old, whatever your lifespan is. Towards the end of your life, who do you want to be? Like, what do you want life to look like? Like, what does your family look like? What does your situation look like? Who do you want to be? Okay, so that question, like, if you think about that for a second, okay, that would be what Aristotle and other authors would call your telos. Telos is a word that is a Greek word. It's used quite a bit. You can open your eyes if you want to, but you don't have to. You can stay sleeping, and I'll just be like, man, they were really into that part of the sermon. Okay, they really loved that part of the sermon where we closed our eyes. That's why you do that at the beginning of the sermon. You don't do it later on, by the way. That's an old preacher's tip. Yeah, so, like, if you're gonna, if you think about that, that's your telos. And here's what telos means. It's like the end goal of your life. It's that red pen that you're going for. You're looking for this red pen. That's what it is. It's the end goal, the determination, the limit at which things cease to be. You see it show up in Scripture sometimes. Actually, there's a couple spots in Matthew where this Scripture shows up, and this word shows up. Like, look at what it says here. So it says, but Peter followed him at a distance right up to the courtyard. Remember, this is after after Jesus is arrested. Peter follows Jesus to the courtyard. And right up to the courtyard of the high priest, he entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome, the telos. Like, that's what he wants to see. And let's see how it's going to end. Okay? Or like here it says, but the one who stands firm to the end, telos, to the end of their life, they will be saved. And Jesus says this in Matthew 24. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end, the telos, will come. Like the end of all things. There's this finality to the word telos. It's like the end goal of your life, the thing you're striving to be, the person you want to be. That's your telos. And Aristotle's the one who kind of started using this word as this thing that people use to describe their life and say, this is my end goal, this is the end point, this is the red dot that I'm looking for on this map. That's what I want to find. That's the telos I'm looking for. And for many of us, like, you may or may not have that. I don't know. I don't know what your life looks like. But my assumption is that all of us have something. If we, as you closed your eyes, there were probably things that you thought about that you're like, that's what I want my life to look like. That's what I'm shooting for. That's the direction I want to go. That's how I get there. And how to get there is the question, right? The how to get there is the part that we struggle with. But the end goal, most of us could probably crystallize in a few words, actually. You could probably come up with a few things. I know that if I were to use words like hope, hopeful, I think we all want to be hopeful people, or joyful people. I think most of us want to be people not just of happiness, but of deep joy. I think most of us want to be people of peace. Like where our lives are like, we don't have to prove things, we don't have to feel like things are crushing us all the time. We are just at peace with the world around us, with those around us, with relationships, with all the people that we come in contact with. I think we want to be people like that, don't we? Like, is it just me? I think that's part of what you feel when you think that way, right? When you picture that future world. But for many of us, like the telos is this pin that's been pinned for us. We have a really hard time navigating how to get there. What happens here, as we look at what Jesus is talking about, he's offering this life to people. In this passage that Denise read for us, you'll notice that he's talking about this life that he offers people. In Luke chapter 5, this is what he says. He says, it says that they question him. Now this is why they question him, just so you know. Jesus is just now calling disciples. So people are starting to come around to see this life that he has to offer, this thing that he's offering them. He's like early on in his calling of disciples. Just the chapter before, he called all the disciples. He starts to speak to them. And they say, well, John's disciples, they have all these things they do, all these rituals. They fast and they pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours, they go on eating and drinking. There's like this thing that they're doing differently. And Jesus says, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he's with them? Like, can you make them do that? He's there. He's not going to fast. Do you think they're going to fast? And the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days, they will fast. And then he told this parable. No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they'll have torn their new garment and patch the old one with the new. And there's no one who pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. And no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better. New wine must be poured into new wineskins. Now here's what that means. I know it's weird, we don't talk about wineskins a whole lot, but what he's saying is there's a wine, we like the wine that you're offering. There's this life that you're offering us. But that life you're offering us must be into some form of container. There's something that has to hold it and give it form and structure. The life you're offering us needs a structure around it. Here's what I mean by that. Like you don't buy, I don't know how you buy wine, I shouldn't say that, but I'm assuming you don't just buy wine that just comes like as liquid on a counter and you just kind of scoop it up and take it with you, right? I don't know how you buy wine. I know some of you are like, well, you don't know how much I drink. You know, like, I really need that wine. I'll just pour it in here and I'll drink it right on my hands. I don't know how you buy wine. I don't know how fancy you are. I don't know if it comes in a bottle or a box. I don't know how much you like to party. But this but what he's talking about is that this wine needs a structure to live in. You can't live this life without a structure that will hold it. Now, most of us get caught up on this scripture because it's about new and old, and that is part of it. I'm not saying it's not part of it. What he's saying here is like, you can't live this life without some structure that holds it together. You need the wineskins to hold it up. You need something that's going to put some structure around it. And that's what this series is actually about. Now, you'll notice there's a rhythm to what he talked about. There's this part of it where it's going to be about fasting and about when not to fast and when to fast. He mentioned that. We'll get to that later. That's not for today. But what he does talk about is he talks about this form and structure that creates the life you want to live. The telos that you're shooting for, this red pin that you've been trying to get to, there's a structure that you need to have in place to help you get to that place. You won't get there on your own. You won't get there with the wine just spilling out all over the place. It needs something that holds it up and creates a structure around it. And this series, like what my goal is, my hope is that as we go through this series, we go through some things that are not about getting to a destination. It's not about doing more stuff. That's not what the goal is here. We're going to go through a bunch of practices. We're going to spend time on practices that have held up over time. Things that people have used for literally centuries to help them create the life that Jesus wants. To help them create the rhythm and the life that Jesus has put around them. We're going to talk about that for the next 9 weeks. We've got a while in this, okay? We're going to spend time on what that looks like and how to implement that. I think, and this is just me, over the beginning of the year, this is a great time to start to implement these things again. Maybe there's some things that you're really good at, maybe some things you're not very good at. Maybe some things you've never tried, maybe some things you do all the time, that you need to rebalance in your life. Because my guess is you have what's called a rule of life already in your life. So the rule of life is what scholars and theologians have called this practice, this idea for years. When you take a collection of practices, put them together, they call it the rule of life. You have a rule of life, you just may not know it. Your rule of life may be setting an alarm very early and getting up and getting your day started. It may be going to the gym. It may be starting off with a run. It may be starting off with reading. It may be starting off with just getting up and rolling out of bed because your kids drug you out of it. It may be start out with whatever the patterns are that you have in your life. You probably have a pattern of life. You have a rule of life. And let me just say, if you don't create this structure, if you're not creating a pattern of your own, I promise you the world will create one for you. That's how they make money, right? We pay a lot of money for our phones, but who's making the real money on this, right? The phones are just an object that when they send a push notification, it's a chance for us to re-engage with the life that they want for us. Whether it's an app that you want to look at or a thing you want to buy, that is what they're sending you to put you back into their rhythm of life. If you don't have one for yourself, I guarantee you the world will create one. And from the time you get up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night, you have created a rhythm of life, whether you've meant to or not. You live by a rule of life. The question is it the one that will get you to the telos that you want? Is it the one that gets you to that red pen? Is it the one that creates love and joy and peace? Or is it one that just continues to create anxiety and worry and isolation? Is that the one you want to live? Which one is it? As we go through these practices, that's the goal that we look at. And this isn't just for us. I just want to be clear. This has been something that's been around through history. The rule of life is something that's come along for a long time. I'm sorry, today's not much of a sermon, by the way. Today is really just a history lesson on why this is so important. I hope that because we're not going to look at any more scripture. We're done. Okay, so that's this is just going to be kind of an understanding of what the rule of life means and what it is to live by a rule of life. This isn't something that just happened to us. It's not a new thing. This isn't a new fad. This is something that's been around for a long time. In the 4th century, the church was really in a bad place. In the 4th century, if you don't know, a guy named Constantine became the ruler of Rome. And when he was emperor of Rome, he decided that Christianity, in 313, he decided that Christianity would become a legalized religion, right? And then about 10 years later, he decided that it would become the official religion of Rome. And then in 340, in the ruling of Thessalonica, he says, it is now the only religion allowed in Rome. Christianity was the only religion allowed in Rome. Now, that sounds good if you are thinking well, that must be nice. And it wasn't. It was one of the worst things that happened to Christianity. Most people believe that Constantine only did this out of a political move. I know it's shocking to think that a politician would use religion to get ahead. Far be it from them to do that. I'm just saying, it did help him with the goodwill of the people at this point because Christianity had flipped into a majority religion in Rome. And so it was advantageous for Constantine to do this. But it was not advantageous for the church to be a part of it. What happens, and if you ever notice this, if you pay attention to any powers in the world, every time that the church gets its spiritual power mixed up with earthly power, only one of those two can really win out, and generally it's going to be earthly power that's going to take the precedence. Because we're humans, and we're flawed, and man, we love some earthly power. And so at this time, the church had lost its way. The church was now everybody's thing. It was now a national religion, and it had lost what it had been, which was this radical movement that was changing lives and doing things. And if I'm being honest with you, this is where I think we are today. Like, this is where I think the church exists in America. Like, I don't know about you, but if I were to ask you, like, your Christian walk, what it's like to be a Christian, I can't tell you how many people, at least I talk to, that tell me, well, I was just born a Christian. Which isn't biblical, because I think Jesus says you have to be born again as a Christian, if I'm not mistaken. I could be reading that wrong. But like, it's not just you were born a Christian, or you were just born into a Christian house. I think we use this idea of being a Christian much like, again, like if we were taking a census, this is how I think we see Christianity. Is like, well, if I had a census, I wouldn't check that I'm Muslim or Hindu or agnostic. I'd probably say I'm a Christian. Like, it's just a box you check, because that's the closest you could come, right? Well, I'm not anything else, so I'm probably a Christian. It's our default setting as a nation, as a people. It's just kind of a default setting. It's not something we really love. Again, I've mentioned before, I really love that Catholics have that phrase that they say, where you're a practicing Catholic or a non-practicing Catholic, because if we were to take that and do a poll on that in Christendom, I would say we have a lot more non-practicing Christians than we do practicing Christians. We got a lot of Christians, sure. We like the label, it sounds good, whatever. Are we doing anything with it? My guess is most of us, no. We're not practicing Christianity, we just are Christians. We like the label, we like the title. And this is what happened in the early 4th century, and it's what happens today, I think. And so some of the church, so what happened in the church at the time, which is what I think we have to learn from today, is that there were some folks that started to take this really seriously. And they got a little frustrated about it. And so they decided they would go live as Jesus lived. And what they did was they left the culture of Rome and they went out into the desert, just like Jesus did when he was fighting with Satan, and they were having this whole showdown about the temptations and all this stuff. That's what they did. One man named Father Anthony. So Father Anthony was a monk in Egypt. This is him, if you want to see him. I'm sure that's exactly what he looked like. Father Anthony was one that was like one of the first ones to do this. And Father Anthony wrote a lot about it, phenomenal writings actually, from the late 5th century. And when he started writing, he went out into the desert and he decided he was going to live on his own out in the desert. This is where we started to see the monastic movement of monasteries and convents, monks and nuns. People who were like literally withdrawing from the culture, doing something countercultural because they wanted to recapture what it was to follow Christ without all the restraints of the culture around them, to do something different and recapture what it really was. And so they went out and they started these vows. They were like, you're going to take a vow and you're going to like be a part of this community as you enter this community out here. It's going to look different than the culture you're used to. And it didn't stop with Father Anthony. Anthony was one of the first, but he was in Egypt, and then it spread a little bit, and it moved over from there. It moved into to Italy. Father Benedict, Saint Benedict, became one of the more famous ones. If you don't know Saint Benedict, there's a new book that came out just a couple years ago called The Benedict Option. I wouldn't highly recommend it, but it was, I think they, in my opinion, they twisted a little too far to make their own point in the story. But they were talking about how Benedict was a man who left the culture and he created what was called the school of life. You would come out there and you would actually like take on this school to learn how to live differently in the way that Jesus wanted you to live, in the way that Christendom needed us to live differently than the culture was set in. And they took on these practices. This is how you're going to practice things. And then later on, we see in the 13th century, if you skip a little bit forward, the Franciscan shows up. So this is Saint Francis of Assisi, who he was a poet, and so he was a little bit of an artist. So his picture is a little bit more artistic. But he was a guy who created the Franciscan order. Today we still have Franciscan monks all over the world who follow his way because he put together a certain way of living. There were these certain practices that he thought were very important. And he called it the Franciscan order. Today people still live by the Franciscan order. And then you fast forward just a little bit more. You get to my favorite, who is Count Nicholas. Count Nicholas, his name is Zinzendorf. Yeah, Zinzendorf, which is fun, isn't it? And he was a German man who took on a thing where he called it the Order of the Mustard Seed. And it was a set of rules of life, these certain rules that you were going to follow in order to recapture this life. He created this in Germany, and then we started to see it spread from Germany into England. And we saw this with John Wesley. If you're not familiar with John Wesley, he's probably one of the more influential thinkers in a church like ours. John Wesley created the Wesleyan order. He called it the Holy Wesleyan Order, but it was a set of rules that people would live by, and they would come into a community as they started to live differently. And he created this whole movement of people doing that were simply living by the same rule of life as one another. And they had these agreed upon rules. And then he had like 22 questions you had to kind of follow, but there was a lot of different rules, but he had some. And then you see this move just a little bit further, even into America. In the 1850s, there was a reformer, his name's Charles Finney. And Charles Finney was in the Second Great American Awakening movement. And his final sermon that he ever preached was called The Christian's Rule of Life. And he brought the rule of life of these simple practices that he put together, saying this is how we should live, even in America. Even more modernly, some people you might know a little better. Mother Teresa, for instance, was one in Calcutta who created her 11 rules of humility that you live by. And she had a way of living, a rule of life, if you will, that she practiced every single day and put others through to help learn how to live like Mother Teresa. Even this one guy, his name's Billy Graham. You may have heard of him. He may or may not have gone to school at Trinity College. So you're standing on holy second floor right now. He didn't go to this campus. It was a different campus. I think he was there for 7 days. But he went to Trinity College. And even Billy Graham, like towards the end of his life, he actually felt like people needed a rule of life. He did a thing in Modesto, California. He pulled together a bunch of scholars and a bunch of church leaders, and he did a thing called the Modesto Mandate. And they put together this rule of life. It was 9 things that people would live by, and they would have this rule of life. This rule of life was like this thing that's kind of lived in church history because we are so prone to sway away and to get lost in the day-to-day. We're so prone to go another way. If, as Paul would write it, we're so prone to fall into the patterns of this world, aren't we? Because the world has a pattern. But we need these practices, these rules, if you will, that hold us together. Now, when you hear rule, you might be a person who bristles at that right away. You're like, well, I don't do rules. I'm not a rule person, you know. It's not how I act. I'm not into the rules thing. Actually, the word rule here is not maybe the word you think it is. The word rule that they used was actually a Latin word. And if you think about this for a second, it was the word regula, which regula is where we get the word like regular, regulate, that kind of thing. But it actually, if you pay attention to the definition of the ruler is a straight stick, or a bar, or a ruler. So what it is it's the thing that holds you from where you're at right now to that point that you want to be at. The red dot you're shooting for, the telos that you're trying to get to, it's the straight line that you look at and say, this is how far away I am from the person I want to be and the person I am right now. It's the straight line that helps you. The rule is not just a rule, just to follow a rule. The rule is the straight line that helps you stay on course to know where you're going. Now, for many of us, we struggle with this maybe a little bit. And this is why I think that this series, I want to call it not a rule of life, but a rhythm of life. And here's why I think that's important. And I'll just tell you like up front, here's why we're doing this in the way we're doing it with this series. We're going to go through a whole bunch of these, but I want you to see them as a rhythm, not as just a rule. Because there are times where you're going to need one more than another. There's this old saying that if I were to fly, or if I were to sail from New York to London, right? If I were to set a course to sail from New York to London, and if I set my course just 1 degree wrong, I would miss my target by over 60 miles when I got to England. I'd be like nowhere near where I wanted to land. And that is true. I do agree with that. Like you need to know where you're going, have that destination in mind, be on track. But if you ever actually sailed, I've only done it once, it did not go great. But here's what I know about sailing. Sailing is not a straight line. Never has been, never will be. As you sail, you jibe and you tack. You jibe and you tack. You're constantly moving north and south. You're adjusting to the winds and to the waves. You're constantly moving as this thing happens. You're readjusting and reasserting yourself to go the right direction. You're not just staying still. It's not a static course. You're constantly realigning yourself with the destination you're trying to get to. And there are times, I think, in our lives where we get heavy on one thing, and that's fine. But we have to readjust in the way we're going. It's not just a final destination that we're just smooth sailing one direction only the entire way. We have to be willing to move as we go. There are rhythms involved. And for some of us, like, that's what we have to learn. I think so many times we get hung up on these disciplines, and we're like, if I miss one, then everything else falls apart. Or if I think I don't need one, I just completely throw it out. There will be times, as we'll look through these in just a second, there will be times where you're going to need some of these more than others, and times where you're going to need to lean on these. My goal is more that, it's a terrible analogy, but my goal is more that you see this more as here are disciplines in my tool belt that I know how to use that keep me on this course. And they create this ruler that creates a boundary for me. But much like if you went to the gym, and if you've never been there before, and you were like, I want to go in, I want to get like really big biceps. And guys, I've wanted that my whole life. It's never happened. My arms are too long. I don't think it's possible to create biceps on these arms because they just get longer. Like I think it's terrible, you know? I'm terrible at bench press. I'm horrible at it. Anybody do bench press? Yeah. I love the people who are like, they have like a chest out here and they got arms this long and they're like, I'm great at bench press. Like, well, I'm great at bench press too if it moves 2 inches. Some of us have monkey arms and no chest at all. It's a long way to go, nerds. I hate those people. Anyways, if you go into the gym and you're like, I want to get better at bench press, or I want to have a bigger chest, or I want bigger arms, or whatever. If you walk in the first time, you probably don't know how to do that. You see a lot of machines, a lot of people grunting. You see a lot of weights in front of you. Which thing do I do? How do I move the things? What's the goal here? You don't know. Now, eventually, after you've done this for a while, and you've lifted for a while, and you've been around people that have lifted for a while, there comes a point where when you walk in next time and you say, I want to do this one thing, I want this one goal accomplished, you know the exercises and the right things to do to get you there. The problem is, most of us, we don't practice any of it. We hear about it, we're around church a little bit, we know that, like, I don't know, fasting's a thing, or minimalism's a thing, or generosity's a thing, or we know things like that are good. We don't practice it ever, so we don't know if it works for us or not. We don't know what we're supposed to do with it. The goal during this series is we're actually going to practice these things together. If you're not already in a group, I would encourage you to get in a group of people who practice these things, to try them out, to like give it a shot, actually like doing the thing, because that's kind of what Jesus tells us to do, is that we actually have to do the thing that we're supposed to do. We can't just talk about it or learn about it, but we actually have to practice it. And so if we look at it, there's a rule of life, there's 9 things that we're going to walk through. Now, these are not the only things you could ever have in a rule of life, but there are 9 things that we've that really have lived as the major rule of life. And the cool thing about them is they live in this way that is so countercultural to everything else. And it's going to be hard for some of us, but it's something we have to practice. The first, probably one that you're not shocked with at all, is prayer. And I do believe that prayer is a rule of life we have to add to our daily routines if it's not already there. We're going to have to shift some things around and make this a thing, because prayer in the culture of distraction that we live in is very difficult. We live in a culture of distraction at all times. We live in what's called the attention economy. Things are trying to distract you. They're trying to literally take your attention. And it's really hard to focus and pray when you live in a culture of distraction. But it's something that we think is, that I believe is absolutely necessary if we're going to have any form of getting to the place we want to go. Second is Scripture. And it's hard for us in a culture that wants to say there is no truth and there is no orthodoxy that is good, to believe that there is still truth and there is still orthodoxy we hold to. That's hard to do in a culture like ours. But to get to the place that we want to go, I believe, to be people of hope and joy and peace especially, we have to live at least understanding the things that Jesus taught and reading them for ourselves and spending time and understanding those for ourselves. Being people who know the Scripture and can use the Scripture appropriately. Third is solitude. We're going to get to that later, but some of you are already like, I don't do that. And some of you are like, that's all I ever want to do. You introverts and extroverts, this whole thing's going to be a lot of fun. But but solitude in a culture that is constantly demanding something from you is a very hard thing to do, is to create a place where you are in solitude. We see Jesus do it over and over and over again. It can't be something that I think we leave out of our lives. And I don't know about you, but when I carve out that space for solitude, it makes me a better extrovert Like it makes me a better people person because I've had that space for solitude and because I've had that time to be in my own head, but also in relationship with Jesus, who I believe is the source of hope and joy and peace. Fasting in a culture that wants indulgence all the time. I get what I want when I want it. Fasting's a tough one. I'm not just talking food, I'm talking Amazon, I'm talking Netflix, whatever it is. In a culture where we are used to getting everything we want when we want it, and within 2-day shipping, we are not used to fasting. And the patience that comes with it, and the things that we learn about ourselves within it, and how the things that we learn that we crave. Once you remove something, you realize how much you crave it. And fasting for some of us is something that we hear about, we talk about, we don't like do it. This is something that I think we have to do to learn how to live this rule of life. Sabbath, in a culture that never wants to slow down, never wants to take a break, in a culture where hustle culture is the culture, right? You're constantly moving, constantly shaking. We love hurry, and we love to continue to move as fast as we possibly can. Sabbath's a hard one for us. To take time and stop and celebrate and rest that God has things under control. It's a hard one for us. Community is the sixth one. Community is, for some of us, this is maybe the one that we love or one that we struggle with more. And in a culture where we're taught rugged individualism, where we're taught that you are as good as you are, but you don't let other people know about what's going on with you, you don't let people into the problems that you have, you don't let people know that you have flaws or cracks or weaknesses. Community is a hard one for us because we're built on rugged individualism. For some of us, community is one we have to let in and let surround us. Generosity, tough one, in a culture where we're supposed to take all we can, right? Like you get what's yours. And you take and you take and you take. You don't let anybody take what's yours. Generosity is a tough one. To allow God to say, I am enough, and believe that there is enough, and to allow him to take what is rightfully his and use it. I know nobody's going to be here that Sunday. We're not just talking about tithing, so I just want to warn you, that's not what that one's about. It's about generosity, which is way more and above and beyond tithing, okay? Hospitality. Hospitality is how the gospel spread in the early culture. And again, in a culture where hostility is, I think, what sells right now, if I'm being honest with you. I think hostility sells. Hostility is how you win. It's how you're in charge. It's how we pit one another against one another. Hostility is what sells right now. Hospitality is the opposite, and it's going to be an uphill battle to be people of hospitality. That one of all of them, by the way, shows up in literally every single one of the rules of life that you see of monastic fathers. They're called the desert fathers, desert fathers, mothers. Hospitality shows up with every single time, which is kind of weird. It's crucial. And the last one is simplicity. You see this a lot in convents, you see this a lot with monks, you see this one that show up a lot. But in a culture where, again, we are taught that you're supposed to take as much as you can and consume all you possibly can. We live in what's called a consumer economy. You know this as well as I do. We are taught to buy and to continue to accumulate. We are taught to make more and more and more rather than be happy or sufficiently happy with what we have. And so simplicity is the last one we're going to talk about. So we're going to go through these over the next few weeks. We're going to put a couple together, and we'll kind of combine a few. We're going to go through these, and then the goal is, as you're in groups over the next few weeks, that there's a practice that goes with it. We'll have practices. And I'm sorry, like you're going to have to actually do stuff. And I know you're like, I didn't come here for homework. And that's not, sorry. I feel terrible about it. I hope you can tell. I feel really bad. Because if you don't remember what Jesus says over and over again, he says things like, there's this wineskin, it needs a structure that's going to hold it up, and you're not going to make it without it. He says things like, if you're going to build your house, you're going to build it on a rock, not on sand. And he says, people who build their house on the rock, those are people who hear my words and put them into practice. They actually do the thing. They're going to actually make a rule of life and try that out and stick with that. Again, for us, it's rhythms. It's going to be something where some of these will come and go. There might be times where you need more solitude. There might be times where you need more community. Right? Times where you need to give more, or times where you need to just be happy with what you have. There's going to be different things that come and go. My goal is not that this is not about us doing things. It's about what these things can do to us. So my hope is that at the end of this time, we see ourselves more like the people we want to be, the telos that we're shooting for, that we use these rules as a ruler to see us getting closer and closer to the people that we want to become, and the people that Jesus wants us to be in this world. One of the hard things is you probably hear that and you go, well, I'm going to have to add like 1 million hours to my calendar. How do I do this? The reality is you're not adding anything. Jesus actually never asks anybody to add anything to their life. But he does ask you to subtract some things. The kingdom doesn't come through addition, it actually comes through subtraction. Being willing to remove some other things from our lives to make room for this. Like there might be a little bit less Netflixing. And I know that Meghan Markle just started a new show, and I know we're all going to have to give that up, and that's a tough one. And some of you are like, I know what I'm giving up for Lent right now. No, like, we're going to have to give that up. I know it's hard. Or it might come down to like less time where you're, I don't know, playing Wordle. I'm sorry to be that guy, right? It might come down to some things that you do less of. For some of us, including me, it might come down to working less, which we're not taught to do in our culture. I don't know if you know that or not. Like, this is what it looks like. It's going to be a removal of things to create room for better things, and using those things as a rule of life that help us get to the telos that God's called us to. So before we leave, we're going to sing just for a second. We're going to ask God to make room in our lives for us. That we would make room for him to do the things he wants to do in this next few weeks together. So if you would, let's stand together and let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for your way of life, your way of living. I thank you for the beauty of it. For so many of us in this room, we probably are not where we want to be, if we're being honest. We're probably not living the life we want to live. We're not the people we want to be. We don't have the attributes that we're hoping for. But Jesus, I pray that as we put these rules, this ruler up to our lives, that you would help us be people who become more and more like you. People who are full of hope, people who are full of love, people who are full of joy, people who are peaceful, people in a world that needs it. I pray that over this next few weeks, as we realign our lives, just as a church, but as individuals too, I pray that as we start just a new year as a community, you would help us to realign our lives around yours. Thank you so much for your example. I pray that we would learn from it as we go through this. We love you. We thank you for your love for us. In Jesus'
name. Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to, do whatever you want to. Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender.
Well, I hope that you have a great week, and I'll see you back next week as we begin this series, kind of getting into the practices together. On Saturday, don't forget, we'll be serving together, so we'll meet here at 9. But I'll send out an email this week about the details, just to give you a little bit more as we flesh out those details this week, to let you know more about that. I hope that you can make it to be a part of that as we do that together. And if we don't have your email address, fill out the Connect card there. You can drop it in the box in the back or hand that to me or whatever. I'd love to make sure you get all the information about that as well. Have a great week, and we will see you on Saturday. We'll serve together.
Have a good week, buddy. You too. Good to see you. Happy